The video you're about to watch features a conversation I had with Mustafa Khan, a fourth year at the University of Toronto, specializing in robotics and AI. Although he's just in his final year of undergrad, Mustafa's been able to accomplish a bunch of things to do with 3D vision and autonomous driving, as well as work with Huawei under their Noah's Ark lab. Over our conversation, we spoke about AI, research, and how to get into it. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Mustafa Khan. Mustafa Khan, thank you so much for joining me.
Hello, hello.
Again, I'm really thankful for the fact that you took your time out of your busy schedule and joined me on a busy Friday afternoon. So, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Let's get into it.
As I know, it's your final year of undergrad at U of T. How's your final reading week?
It's good. It was, I think, as you get closer to the end, you slowly start to realize that you start to appreciate that this is it.
Mm.
And reading week. The nature of reading week in NSI is such that we have all our midterms before.
Right.
So reading week is more like recovery week.
Right.
But yeah, I had a moment to reflect on just I'm getting to the end and I need to make the most of the time and the people that I have around me.
Mm-hmm.
And also obviously plan the next step. So a lot of my reading week went into planning grad school apps and getting started on that.
Gotcha. Now, the way that we met actually was that you did a talk at AI, I think, and I thought you delivered a great talk, honestly.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it thoroughly, and one of the best things I thought that you did well was the fact that within every single step of getting into AI, as we'll talk about, you delivered a very, very structured approach to approaching AI that I've never seen anyone take on. But before we get to that, I'd love to hear more about your background. How'd you get into AI in the first place?
Yeah, this is a great question. I would say I've broadly been interested in tech, robotics, and AI since I can't even remember.
Wow.
But I didn't know about the specifics about AI and AI research until maybe around grade 11 and 12 in high school. And as with a lot of things in life, it was other people around me who were sort of a bit ahead and interested in that, that sort of showed me that this is a possibility. So I had a really close friend in high school who actually encouraged me to come along to some hackathons. And I knew how to program just very basic things at that time, but really they were the ones who were technically more adept than me. And in the process of sort of going to these hackathons, I quickly realized this is just a space where you can, work on a project, create something completely brand new. And then we were very lucky to I think we won second place in our first ever hackathon that I went to. So,
do you remember what it was?
Yeah, it was actually Wolf Hacks. It was
Is that Wolfram Alpha?
No. It's just high school
okay.
in Mississauga or Brampton or something.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
it was through the inspiration of a couple of my friends that I sort of got interested. And then it was only later, close to grade 12, when I was applying to universities, looking at what programs existed, that I started to the idea started to form in my head that I want to maybe pursue this a bit more seriously. But yeah, before that, tech was always the thing. It was either U of T or maybe the dream was MIT, but unfortunately that didn't happen at that time.
But you're now specializing in robotics and AI, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Robotics is, so in engineering science, there's 2 years of foundational engineering, and then you get to choose different specializations. So the specialization that I'm in is called robotics, and I'm minoring in AI.
Minoring, gotcha.
So that's technically what it is. Yeah.
Gotcha. When you were first getting into AI, right? What were some of the things you were doing to really learn more about it?
To contextualize this, hackathons were obviously one way of trying to exercise the thing, and every time we went, we tried to do an AI project.
Right.
But at some point, roughly around the end of grade 12, pandemic started, and I was at home with a lot of time. And so what I decided to do was try to formalize my knowledge a bit more. And so I started off with some online courses. There's Udacity has some really nice courses. There's a very famous Stanford AI course as well, and trying to like go through these independently, looking at both the math, looking at the code, and I quickly like realized that there's a gap between like there's sort of like a gap that exists, and there's a lot of people in AI or who are interested in AI that sort of are doing very applications oriented things, and then at the time I was like, there are these researchers that exist, and I was very curious about like what are they doing, and you know, they're the ones creating this stuff, and we're sort of like in hackathons applying it, and obviously companies, sometimes people are applying it. Obviously the reality is a bit more complicated. This is a very, you know, this dichotomy is very naive, but this is how the grade 12 me viewed it. I was like, you know, there's us and then there's the researchers, and I was essentially wondering like what is the difference? How do you get to that?
Right.
And the reality is researchers are just people as well. So, but I sort of put them a bit on a pedestal. Like, and the way I tried to get closer to that side of things was by just reading a bunch of papers.
Gotcha.
And
gotcha.
yeah, like I think reading papers is like at the end of the day, it sort of boils down to you can make a lot of progress if you read a lot. I think that's true not just in AI, like in other areas as well. Like the more you read, you're essentially like standing on the shoulders of giants, just like taking the insights that they have gotten and then sort of absorbing it and then thinking about it. So
you mentioned that during your talk, actually, like reading over papers as much as possible.
Yeah.
And we'll get into it a bit later, but let me ask you first, if you had to start over, go back in time like a couple years, what would your roadmap be for getting into AI?
Do I have a talk for you that you can look at? I do think that you need to spend some amount of time just like going over foundational things, and like the things I suggested, like these particular courses, they're more like recommendations. Really, what
I'll put them on screen right now. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Like you can if you have a course in your university, or if you find something else online, or some other channel on YouTube that you're like following, or some other tutorial, like the details at this point are less relevant. What's more important is you're sort of doing the reps to understand some foundational concepts, whether that's like how does backpropagation and gradient descent work in general, or what are the different types of network architectures that exist. So until you've accumulated this base level of knowledge, it's very difficult to sort of go ahead and either create something completely new or do research. So yeah, you sort of have to spend that requisite amount of time there. And I do suggest particular resources, but I think that it is a bit more open. I'm not going to say like, you know, someone who tries something else isn't going to also make it. I think just sort of building on that a bit, I like to think of the accumulation of knowledge sort of like painting a house. You know, if you have a wall, right, there's different ways of painting this wall, right? Like at the end of the day, if you do a couple of brush strokes here and then you leave it and you go work on something else somewhere else and you do a couple of brush strokes there, at the end of the day, the pathway that you take is less important as putting in the time in order to actually complete painting that wall. So I view paper reading very similarly. Like there are papers that I remember vividly I read in my first year of undergrad or second year of undergrad that I thought I understood at the time, but only like maybe 2 years later I went back a couple of times more and I'm like, oh, I like now have learned something in a course, maybe some more math, maybe some other insight, and I go back and read the paper and I can better appreciate the work that has been done there.
Right.
And that's sort of like painting a wall. I wouldn't be so stressed about having a complete understanding. I don't think most people have a complete understanding of the work. Maybe only like the authors do. And after like their second or third research project after that, maybe they don't even remember all the details as well. But like my point is, it's this is a very different type of text, right? Like you sort of the way you engage with it is quite different in that sense compared to maybe like, I don't know, reading a story or something else, where usually in stories you're going cover to cover, start to end. But in this, you don't need to do that. Like you can focus on the parts that sort of are relevant to what you are working on or thinking about at the time. Try to appreciate what they're doing, and then eventually maybe one day you actually do fully understand a paper.
So step 1, get into the foundational ideas of AI. Step 2, get into research papers. And I don't know if this is step 3, like right after, but one thing that you mentioned in your talk that I thought was really, really interesting, and not a lot of people bring up, is the idea of reproducing papers. So you mentioned like appreciating papers down to like the nitty gritty. There's a quick story you mentioned.
Yeah, there was I can't remember if it was what year of NSI it was, but it was right after one of our exams, and so most people had left, like the common room. I think like if you get to the end of the year, second people are done exams, they don't want to be around here. But yeah, I don't know. I was waiting on a friend. We decided to meet up and catch up because we hadn't spoken after a while. And he was actually one of those friends from high school who initially we got into AI together. And it was quite fun. We just decided he was like, what are you working on? I was like, oh, I'm doing some research on vision transformers with the professor. He's like, oh, I'm actually doing something with transformers as well. And we're like, well, competitively, we're like, do you really understand the paper? And then, start testing each other and our knowledge. And then that eventually turned into just us on a whiteboard, just like, okay, this is exactly what is happening every step of the way. This is all the math. And we started coding it up. We had some ideas actually for like what to do. And if you go to my GitHub today, you will find that project is just there. It's like vision. I think it's like, just a project on implementing VITs. And then we try to do something interesting with it. But obviously to get to that point,
A high level sort of understanding is required.
Yeah, like I had been looking at transformers for quite a while.
Right.
I'd been working with VITs in my research. You can't just like sit down and pick up a paper and fully do that in like 1 day or 2 days. Like it takes a bit of time. I don't think I could do that with all papers. Like you need some level of expertise with the area at least, or some familiarity. But I do think it's very valuable. Like you can make a lot of progress in your understanding if you try to essentially do what the authors were doing. And another aspect of this is actually when you're doing research and you're trying to come up with a new gap or a new idea, oftentimes what the people are doing is they're actually sitting down and taking the state-of-the-art works that exist, setting it up. This acts as obviously your baseline, but then trying to run it, not necessarily reproduce it from scratch, but run it to try to understand what the limitations of that are.
Right.
And it's sort of like a proxy way of doing the same thing. It's like you're not exactly, writing everything line by line, but you're reading everything line by line. You're trying to study how does this code work? How can I apply this to my problem space? Or what are the limitations? How can I break this? And usually in the process of that, researchers do a really good job of trying to put their work in positive light. They limitation sections are restricted to 3 sentences at the end of a paper.
Yeah.
But there are limitations to all works,
Right.
and this is how you uncover those limitations. Most people are already aware of it because they've been working in the field. But if you're entering a research space, that's what you do. You literally not reproduce, but try to reproduce results. Try to engage with the code and the paper and so on and so forth.
Right. I think the best way to learn anything, not even just AI related, is just to build something and see, or build something with the concept itself.
Yeah.
Over the summer, I met the best group of friends possible, and we just spent the entire summer we called it hackathon hopping. We just went to hackathon, and built as many things as possible. That's kind of how I started this, to be honest, just posting about the creations that we made on YouTube. And then honestly, right after a hackathon, we just sit down and go did we just build that? What the heck? After doing hackathons and building stuff, boy, did I really understand a bunch of the concepts that were just floating in my head at that point.
Yeah.
Right? Is there any other steps after reproducing
I think
papers?
it was do projects, do work. And
Right.
so yeah, hackathons are one way for sure. I think the other ones I usually recommend are, if you're in a university, you have to seek out design teams. I feel like that's the most underrated aspect of being a part of a university. They basically give you the ability to work on, I would say almost real world level projects over a long period of time. And then you sort of get experience, as you said, translating your understanding into actual, making it concrete, solidifying that. But also I think it's just it just upskills you in several ways. You understand how to work in a team, you understand the impact that your work could have in society, not just what you're being presented in sort of a lecture, but actually seeing it in the real world.
Right.
So there's a lot of benefits, and I think that if you're trying to get into AI research specifically, really what you want to do is you want to find the areas that can provide you with the soft and hard skills that will eventually allow you to enter that space.
And you're the technical director of a design team here in St. George.
Yeah.
aUToronto?
Yes.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so at aUToronto, we basically built a self-driving car to compete in the SAE Auto Drive Challenge. So this is a competition with, I think, over 8 universities compete against each other across Canada and the US, trying to build a level 4 self-driving car. And so we're currently in the 4th year of the competition.
Wow.
I think we have 1 more year left next year.
Oh, wow.
And we've been doing pretty well. U of T is a very competitive team. There's a lot of really talented people that I've got to work with. I joined when I was in my 1st year, and I've sort of stuck through ever since,
Wow.
trying different aspects of perception. And yeah, today I'm the technical director of perception at aUToronto, so mainly leading the 2D vision teams, 3D object detection team, and the tracking teams. So we focus mostly on just making sure that our car, which we call Artemis, or Artie for short, that Artie can see the world and can understand everything around it. And hopefully that is useful for downstream teams like the planner and control.
It's really cool. Yeah. So I definitely, I mean, that sounds like a lot of fun. Like, I definitely recommend a bunch of undergrads, first years like me, to join that for sure. That's
You should
awesome.
definitely try it. Like, I think you'd find it very, very valuable to your own learning.
Are applications still open?
I think they're closed for this semester, but
So winter.
yeah, for winter
Okay.
semester, and then obviously every year we have like cycles.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So getting to AI, right? So foundational, then read research papers, try to reproduce them, do projects, right? A lot of the problems though with getting to AI is that a lot of people find themselves in what I call intro tutorial, project hell, and what I call the pre-built Lego set principle, where a lot of tutorials
Give you everything?
yeah, basically give you everything. What do you say to that, and how do you get yourself to a level where you truly understand things?
Yeah, I think that's, and I mean, yeah, with ChatGPT that's worse, right? But okay, I think that I definitely understand that problem. I face that as well. To some extent, you have to be okay with, like, you know, they're trying to make, they have put, whoever has created a course or a tutorial has put some thought into, like, I'm going to provide you with this so that you can focus on this aspect of the problem and really focus on that. So I think understanding the intention behind that is quite important.
Right.
It doesn't mean that eventually you shouldn't be able to code up everything yourself. I think that should definitely be the aspiration, that you have the level of understanding to do that. But like, I suggest like Udacity's Intro to Deep Learning with PyTorch course, they also provide quite a lot of like boilerplate or like introductory code. But then there are crucial parts of, you know, the problem that are not given. So that's one aspect of it. And then I think like, I think you're almost always going to have something like that where, you know, unless you're literally just sitting down yourself and doing it. So I think what I would like to offer is like maybe sort of like a thing that you should keep at the back of your head that might help you in those situations. So if you're instructed to do something, like I want you to code up an optimize, like or use this optimizer and implement a training loop for a model. And you try to follow that and you're struggling, so you sort of look at the resource that they have and you go back and you look at the resource and you try to like go through it. What will really elevate your level of understanding is if you try to do something that they didn't ask you to do, right?
Okay.
So imagine you were asked to work with like the Atom optimizer and like make a training loop this way, and you did that. Now why don't you try changing the optimizer, or why don't you try adding weight decay, or why don't you try like some other aspect that wasn't really told? So pushing yourself to go just a bit beyond the scope of what is there, like you're going to break something in that process. You're going to be like, oh, I thought it was just as easy as switching this out. It isn't. It broke. And in the process of trying to fix that, you'll understand like, oh, why does this new thing work, and why does the original thing also work?
Right.
So this is what true understanding is. It's the difference between just like remembering or memorizing a solution and then eventually like building an understanding of that thing. Yeah.
Like truly understanding, like, hey, if I change this, why does it break?
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of like what I tell a lot of people when studying math in the first place.
Yeah.
Like,
You're quite interested in
I'll-
math, right? I've seen some of your videos.
a lot of times, like people. So, for example, I think there was like someone asked me like why do I have to calculate what a determinant is, right? Why do I need that? And a lot of people, they'll sit down and read a textbook and they'll see like the textbook definition of a determinant and won't really understand what it is until you give them like an example and then try to tinker around with that and see how it breaks. So for example, the example I gave them was like, give or take some arbitrary 1x1 square. If I apply a transformation matrix to it and turn it into like a rectangle, for example, the determinant is just how much it changed, right? How much a transformation matrix changes some given shape, for example. True understanding comes from understanding how important a lot of these propositions and theories and corollaries actually are, right? Because a lot of these theories, they've come from decades of research. And so they've just plopped into your textbook for seemingly no reason, but in reality, they're a whole lot deeper than you really imagine.
Yeah, for sure.
And so definitely, like, I completely agree with you. Like, if you're trying to learn something, tinker around with it and see if something breaks. I've got one more question or two more questions. Okay, three more questions. And then we'll get into audience questions. Okay. This was actually from me, like, personally, my own fear of starting AI. I'm not going to lie and say that I'm a complete expert. I think I'm past that foundational reading papers stage, though. Or I still read papers, anyway. But my main fear is honestly specialization. Like, I love, honestly, so many things, so many topics in AI. And I love reading research papers about that. But honestly, I'm super fearful of specialization. I'm kind of afraid of like choosing one thing and then going all in on that. I'm kind of afraid that I might have to ignore a couple of other things that I'm honestly super passionate about. So I was wondering what you thought of that. Like, do you have to go all in on a topic?
Yeah, this is I wrestle with this a lot, so this is a great question. Let me think. So in AI, there's something called the explore-exploit problem, or in reinforcement learning, where it's like, to what degree do you explore before exploiting or committing to something? Generally speaking, it is usually a good idea to explore early on and try to get a set of diverse experiences so that you can identify what are things that you're interested in and sort of rule out things that you're not interested in. But you do definitely need to, I would say, like, before you leave undergrad, especially if you want to maybe pursue grad school or are interested in further research, you want to do great work in at least one area. And that requires some degree of specialization. That requires like going deep into that area and thinking a lot about it and spending months of time trying to do something in that area. That doesn't pigeonhole you, surprisingly. You might think it does. I think that that's been my fear. It sort of still is my fear. But I'm slowly starting to realize that actually, if you have demonstrated the capacity to do great work in one area, and you can convince someone that you have transferable skills, I think they'd be more than happy to take you on in other areas.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
To an extreme, if I was a specialist in a particular area and I was looking to do something in another area, then I would sort of look for the specialist in that area and collaborate with them. Right? And if you are doing great work in one area, other people who are also great in other areas are more likely to want to work with you.
Right.
So I think this is the nature of, collaboration between specialists. But I can't always say like I've been like that. I am quite the generalist. I've spent a lot of time doing a lot of other things. I have diverse interests as well, not just technical. It's not so binary that you can't do anything like in those other areas. But I do think that you should explore, but at some point you should try to find at least one or two things that you're really interested in and go deep into them. Because otherwise, it's just like AI research is quite competitive at like the graduate level and beyond. Like, people are looking at what you've sort of done or whether there's some evidence of that you can go and do great work. And someone that is committed to doing that earlier obviously was going to stand out a bit more in those areas.
Of course.
But the risk is like you don't want to just choose something right now because you don't know if that's the thing that you're really interested in. So you do need some level of exploration.
Right.
So try your best. Like, you're in first year, you have a lot of time. Like, try your best throughout first year maybe even second year, to like try doing that exploration. And then as you get to, let's say, second year end, or like you're sort of figured out, because I mean that's a good time because you're also choosing your specialization at that point in NSci. So yeah, that's my general advice on that.
Gotcha. Okay. That's it for my questions.
Okay.
We'll get into audience questions really quick, and
Very windy.
we'll check it out. All right. Let's get into some audience questions.
Of course, yeah.
Will AI take over the world?
We'll try our best not to make that happen.
Arham asks a pretty interesting question. What skills are most important for AI research?
Being open with how uncomfortable it is to not know the answer to some questions.
Gotcha. Danish asks, in your opinion, what is AI's greatest weakness right now?
Weakness.
Yes.
Oh. That's a really good question. I think catastrophic forgetting and the lack of continual learning would be the answers.
Gotcha. Okay. Shreya has a couple questions. What inspired you to get into the field of AI? I think you mentioned it before.
I have, yeah. Just broadly speaking, I like technology. Think it would be really cool to create artificial consciousness.
Cool.
And it's an interesting meta problem that if you solve, you can solve a lot of other problems.
Cool. Another question from Shreya. What is the most challenging skill you've had to teach yourself in your journey with AI?
Also a really good question. Being able to hold multiple viewpoints about an idea.
What do you mean?
Is integral to research. Like, when you're looking at experimental results, it's very easy to, you might be biased to think about the results in one way. And when you talk to other people, they might give you an alternative perspective. And usually nothing is set in stone, so you sort of have to hold two competing perspectives in your mind and wrestle with them. And it's very easy to not do, I would say, like meaningful research if you're quick to just be like, nah, this is the way it is and that's it. Oftentimes you do additional experiments or thinking, and they might uncover a completely different aspect about the problem, and so you have to sort of reinterpret everything again and again and again.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's Shreya. Ooh, okay. At Monadic Mushroom asks, what are some things for first-year CS students to do, or ways to get involved in AI research?
I think if you feel like you don't have the skills yet, you should be taking courses in order to get the skills, or doing projects. You should join design teams or clubs. Clubs such as UT Mist, design teams such as aUToronto, U of T Formula Racing, aUToronto. There's a lot of like design teams you should check online. And then once you feel like you're ready, you should reach out to professors or PhD students. That's also an underappreciated way of getting into research.
Gotcha. Okay. A couple more questions here. Het asks, a couple questions from Het. What strategies do you recommend for managing an overload of information? And I think these are the same questions. How do you stay up to date with the rapid changes and developments in AI?
Great questions. For the overload of information, try writing things down and offloading them from your brain. For just how to, I guess there's a lot of stuff going on in AI. How do you keep up with it? How do you make sure you're digesting everything? You need to allocate some time to doing that. And also it's very helpful to look for resources or people that sort of do a bit of that legwork for you. For example, there are like certain YouTube channels. I think like the most famous one is like 2 Minutes Papers. It's a bit too condensed in my opinion. I think like looking at something like Yannick Kilcher, his YouTube channel, or if you go on Twitter or LinkedIn, you might find, just like follow researchers, you'll sort of like get the Spark Notes versions of different sorts of research that's going on. And then obviously if you have something more relevant, like look for Archive Sanity Light, something that sort of filters what papers are more relevant. So it's a lot of like filtering and sifting through the help of like these resources and other people. And then that I think is what I personally do. And then eventually you have to sit down and digest something, right? Something is important, so you have to sit down and read it or look into it a bit more.
Gotcha. Ooh, 2 last questions, and they're kind of connected. The first of them, what are some key characteristics that you see in AI researchers
Wow, that's a really cool question. I think about that a lot, actually. Like, because in order to improve myself, I think about like what are the commonalities between the people I work with. Okay, I think almost everyone who has performed exceptionally well takes a lot of time to think carefully about the stuff that they're working on. If they're doing experiments, they'll take a lot of time to make sure that they're doing the experiment correctly, that the code they've written matches up with the math that they thought about, that the results sort of make sense, that you're doing sanity checks along the way to make sure that, really like what you're working on makes sense. Mm-hmm. I would say the other thing is on a more like implementation side of things, like a lot of people, as they're doing experiments, they're really good at documenting things. I think like the more people can sort of plot, like I think Hinton was the one who said like, if you, paraphrasing, but it's like if you plot something, then only you can learn something. So like create a plot, like actually get results in tables and infer from that. And then maybe sort of more on the senior research side of things, I would say like the commonalities are they have a lot of knowledge that they draw on, obviously built through years of experience, and sort of like have been building over the years like their own unique perspective on aspects of AI research. Might sound very broad, but I'll give you like one or two examples. For example, I've worked with professors who are very interested in uncertainty quantification. So while a field might be interested in how can we make object detection and tracking and autonomous driving work better, Professor Waslander, for example, is not just doing that. He would also think about like, how can we understand the uncertainty associated with the detections and tracking that we're doing, and then how can we incorporate that to make actually more useful real-world robotics applications. A completely different professor might have a different perspective. I've had professors that view networks as electrical circuits and sort of think of like the connections between them as just, you can view it through the lens of circuits. Others view it through the lens of differential equations. This is a dynamical system that's evolving through time. So the more senior the researchers are, usually they have very interesting perspectives that they try to like start to frame their research through. And I think as a student you get a glimpse of that, but really like the path of, I think, becoming a good researcher is trying to also think about what are those like perspectives that resonate with you and that you can also come up with over time.
Got it. Okay. One last question, right? To send off all the students learning here. You talked about key characteristics of researchers, right? Already very, very experienced. What are some key characteristics that make up a good student?
I jokingly say I don't know because I'm not a good student, but I think,
okay.
I'm kidding. Say curiosity, like actually it's very easy once you're overloaded with a lot of work or midterms or quizzes and assignments that you're like, I really don't want to be doing this. But if you take a step back, like you've been given an opportunity to study at, at least for us, like we're at an incredible institution. I think sort of taking a step back, being like, okay, I'm here because I really love learning. And I am in fact curious about a lot of things, and engaging with the material from that perspective. And then obviously, because this is who I am, I'll tie it to research a bit, thinking about the connections between the stuff you're learning and whether it's like the applications that you're working on or the research that you're doing.
Gotcha. That's everything we needed today. Thank you so much, Mustafa. Like, it was a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great to talk to you as well.